The geopolitical fault lines running across the rugged terrain of Southwest Asia, long prone to simmering tensions and subterranean diplomatic maneuvers, have erupted into a catastrophic, multi-front security matrix that has pushed the Islamic Republic of Iran into a state of absolute, systemic encirclement. Over a frantic 72-hour window, the traditional strategic buffer zones that Tehran relied upon to project regional power have been transformed into a ring of fire. This is not the result of a gradual escalation or a routine border flare-up, it is the manifestation of an aggressive, highly synchronized, and unprecedented strategic convergence between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The activation of this secret, multi-layered alliance has effectively blanketed Iran's eastern and southern frontiers in an operational inferno, leaving the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps paralyzed, outmaneuvered, and profoundly terrified as they witness their borders being systematically choked by an existential pincer movement. The absolute core of this strategic nightmare for Tehran is the sudden, overt integration of Saudi financial and geopolitical leverage with Pakistan's immense, battle-hardened conventional and nuclear-backed military architecture. For decades, Iranian defense planners operated under the comfortable assumption that Pakistan was a neutral, fragile neighbor too distracted by its internal economic woes and its complex relationship with India to ever pose a direct security threat to Iran's eastern flank. Concurrently, Tehran viewed Saudi Arabia as a distant maritime competitor, capable of funding regional proxies but ultimately constrained by geographic distance and a reliance on Western diplomatic permission. This paradigm has been entirely shattered. The secret protocols signed between Riyadh and Islamabad have effectively extended Saudi Arabia's strategic depth directly onto Pakistan's western border, creating a joint operational command that possesses the financial power, technological superiority, and raw manpower to completely neutralize Iran's regional deterrence model. The catalyst for the current conflagration began along the desolate, mountain-ridged border separating the Iranian province of Sistan and Balochistan from Pakistan's Balochistan province. At exactly 3 a.m. local time, a massive, highly coordinated series of precision strikes began to rain down on known IRGC forward operating bases, electronic monitoring stations, and clandestine logistics hubs used by Iranian-aligned militias. To the automated air defense networks of Iran's Southeastern Command, the initial assault appeared to be a localized cross-border counter-terrorism operation. However, within hours, the sheer volume and technical sophistication of the strikes revealed a far more sinister reality. This was not a localized skirmish, it was a comprehensive suppression of enemy air defenses executed by a swarm of advanced, low-observable combat drones, electronic warfare aircraft, and long-range artillery systems operating under a unified, joint Saudi-Pakistani command center located in the coastal city of Gwadar. As the morning sun broke over the burning remnants of the IRGC's forward defensive lines, the true operational scope of the Riyadh-Islamabad alliance became terrifyingly clear to the supreme leadership in Tehran. This was a multi-domain assault designed to exploit the profound structural vulnerabilities of an increasingly isolated Iranian state. While Pakistani heavy artillery and precision-guided missile batteries pulverized insurgent transit routes and military infrastructure along the rugged land border, the Royal Saudi Navy and Air Force executed a massive, parallel show of force in the waters of the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. A powerful joint naval task force effectively established a dense maritime blockade, cutting off the strategic choke points that the IRGC Navy uses to resupply its regional proxies and smuggle illicit energy shipments. The message written in the smoke rising from the borders was unmistakable: Iran's entire periphery had been transformed into an active, highly lethal kill zone. The internal reaction within the command bunkers of Tehran has been one of controlled panic turning into widespread systemic paralysis. For over 2 decades, the cornerstone of Iran's defense doctrine has been the concept of forward defense, the practice of fighting its adversaries in distant theaters like Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, thereby keeping its own sovereign borders completely insulated from the horrors of conventional warfare. The sudden, violent activation of the Saudi-Pakistani alliance has violently dragged the conflict directly onto Iranian soil. The IRGC ground forces, heavily depleted by years of foreign deployments and suffering from severe equipment degradation due to international sanctions, found themselves completely overwhelmed by the speed and technological superiority of the combined forces arrayed against them. Entire border posts were abandoned as communications went dark under the weight of an immense, joint electronic jamming campaign that severed local units from their regional headquarters in Zahedan. The technical parameters of this joint alliance represent a catastrophic evolution in modern asymmetric and conventional warfare, specifically engineered to dismantle Iran's military infrastructure. While Saudi Arabia provided the unlimited financial underwriting and access to advanced intelligence networks, Pakistan supplied the critical operational expertise in mountain warfare, deep penetration artillery tactics, and localized drone integration. Specially trained units, operating under a joint mandate, utilized state-of-the-art satellite imagery provided by Saudi-funded orbital assets to map out the exact coordinates of Iran's deeply buried underground missile silos and command bunkers along the eastern frontier. By utilizing high-altitude, long-endurance strike drones equipped with advanced thermobaric and bunker-busting munitions, the alliance proved that Iran's highly touted underground defensive networks could be systematically targeted and neutralized without the need for a large-scale ground invasion. The strategic implications of this sudden encirclement have sent shockwaves through the global geopolitical and financial systems. The price of crude oil experienced an unprecedented intraday spike of 15%, as international markets anticipated a prolonged, catastrophic disruption to the shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz. International shipping conglomerates immediately issued emergency advisories, instructing commercial vessels to completely bypass the northern Arabian Sea, with some routing supertankers on long, costly voyages around the Cape of Good Hope. The global market was forced to confront a terrifying new reality. The illusion of security in the world's most critical energy corridor had evaporated in a single morning, replaced by an active, high-intensity conflict zone that threatened to drag multiple nuclear-armed powers into a global conflagration. Inside the borders of Iran, the psychological impact of the burning frontiers on the civilian population has been immediate and profound. For years, state propaganda had assured the public that the nation was an unassailable fortress, protected by a vast arsenal of domestic missiles and the absolute ideological devotion of its armed forces. The sudden appearance of massive smoke columns along the horizon, combined with the influx of hundreds of wounded, demoralized border guards into provincial hospitals, tore that fabricated narrative to shreds in an instant. In cities like Mashhad, Kerman, and Shiraz, panic buying gripped the population, leading to a complete collapse of local supply chains as citizens scrambled for food, fuel, and basic medical supplies, fearing that the fires on the border would soon consume the urban heartlands of the country. The state's digital censorship apparatus, usually highly efficient at stifling domestic unrest and controlling the flow of information, found itself completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of leaked data, smartphone footage, and tactical radio intercepts filling social media platforms. Videos showing columns of burning IRGC vehicles, abandoned military outposts, and the frantic retreat of local paramilitary forces along the Balochistan border spread like wildfire, completely undermining the authority of the regime. The Supreme National Security Council convened an emergency, closed-door session in Tehran, with unconfirmed reports indicating fierce, angry recriminations between regular army generals and high-ranking IRGC commanders, each blaming the other for the catastrophic intelligence failure that allowed a massive, hostile alliance to mobilize on their doorstep without detection. As the dust begins to settle on this extraordinary and terrifying escalation, the true depth of Iran's strategic isolation has been laid bare before the entire world. The traditional allies that Tehran expected to lean on in a moment of existential crisis have chosen to remain conspicuously silent or detached. Moscow, deeply entangled in its own prolonged geopolitical commitments in Eastern Europe and dependent on maintaining delicate energy partnerships with Riyadh, has offered little more than generic, muted statements calling for maximum restraint from all parties. Similarly, Beijing, prioritizing its immense economic interests in the stability of global shipping lanes and its massive investments in Saudi energy infrastructure, has shown zero inclination to intervene on behalf of an increasingly volatile and unpredictable Iranian regime. Tehran finds itself completely alone, staring into an abyss of its own making. The day Iran's borders were blanketed in flames will be remembered in military academies and diplomatic chancelleries as the ultimate demonstration of the limits of proxy-driven regional coercion. It proved that numbers on paper, ideological fervor, and low-cost drone technology mean absolutely nothing when confronted by a wealthy, technologically superior, and deeply determined alliance that decides to bring the war directly to the source of instability. For a terrified and surrounded leadership in Tehran, the quiet, persistent roaring of heavy artillery along their burning frontiers is an unforgettable lesson in the enduring, brutal reality of modern statecraft. When you spend decades sowing the seeds of chaos across a region, the harvest you eventually reap is an inescapable, overwhelming, and catastrophic inferno that will ultimately consume you from the outside in. To fully comprehend the systemic collapse of Iran's border security during this operation, one must analyze the specific geographic and tribal vulnerabilities that the Riyadh-Islamabad alliance systematically exploited to achieve maximum destabilization. The Sistan and Balochistan province has long been a soft underbelly for the central government in Tehran. Characterized by extreme economic neglect, a deeply impoverished Sunni majority population, and a harsh, unforgiving geography of arid mountains and deep ravines, the region was ripe for exploitation. For years, Iran had used a heavy, brutal security hand to suppress local Baloch nationalist and religious movements, creating a deeply resentful, underground network of resistance. The Joint Alliance did not merely launch a conventional military assault over the border, they triggered a widespread, internal tribal explosion by providing advanced communications equipment, tactical intelligence, and modern weaponry to these entrenched local factions. Within hours of the initial joint strikes, local Baloch resistance groups, operating in perfect synchronization with the Pakistani artillery barrages, launched a series of high-intensity, insider attacks against internal IRGC security checkpoints, communication towers, and railway lifelines deep within Iranian territory. This internal uprising effectively severed the critical logistical conduits that connect the central plains of Iran with its peripheral border regions. The IRGC reinforcements sent from the interior found themselves ambushed in narrow mountain passes, targeted by precision-guided anti-tank missiles and coordinated roadside improvised explosive devices. The front line did not simply hold or break, it was bypassed completely as the territory behind the border guards erupted into a chaotic, unmanageable insurgent battlefield, making a structured defense utterly impossible for the central command. Furthermore, the economic architecture underwriting this joint military operation represents a profound, sustainable shift in the mechanics of regional warfare. Iran's military-industrial complex, while capable of producing indigenous drones and short-range ballistic missiles, operates under the crushing weight of a near-total financial blockade. Every missile fired, every drone launched, and every armored vehicle deployed by the IRGC represents an irreplaceable expenditure of scarce national wealth. By contrast, the alliance operates with a virtually bottomless treasury. Saudi Arabia's multi-billion-dollar defense modernization funds were directly repurposed to establish a continuous, high-speed logistical pipeline that kept Pakistani artillery units, drone squadrons, and naval assets continuously supplied with cutting-edge munitions, spare parts, and fuel. This vast economic disparity meant that while the alliance could afford to maintain an intense, high-volume saturation bombardment indefinitely, Iran's defensive capabilities began to experience severe structural depletion within the first 48 hours of the conflict. The naval dimension of this encirclement has introduced an equally terrifying variable for Iran's strategic planners, specifically targeting the highly vaunted capabilities of the IRGC Navy in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. For years, Iran had threatened to shut down global energy commerce by utilizing its massive fleet of fast-attack missile craft, asymmetric naval mines, and shore-based anti-ship cruise missile batteries. However, the joint task force led by the Royal Saudi Navy, heavily augmented by Pakistani Naval Aviation and Special Operations Forces, did not attempt to enter the narrow, hazardous waters of the Persian Gulf. Instead, they established a dense, impenetrable operational curtain across the wider, deeper waters of the northern Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman, well outside the effective range of Iran's coastal artillery and short-range naval assets. By utilizing advanced maritime patrol aircraft, towed-array sonar systems, and automated surface surveillance drones, the alliance effectively locked down every major port along Iran's southern coast, including the critical commercial and military hub of Chabahar. Any vessel attempting to breach the blockade was immediately tracked, painted by target acquisition radars, and confronted by overwhelming naval force. This absolute maritime strangulation did not merely halt the flow of commercial goods, it completely froze the maritime supply lines that Iran uses to send weapons, ammunition, and financial support to its proxy networks in the Red Sea and East Africa. The IRGC Navy found itself completely trapped within its own coastal waters, unable to project power outward and forced to watch helplessly as its regional influence was systematically starved of the logistical oxygen required to survive. As the reality of this permanent, hostile encirclement becomes deeply institutionalized across the regional landscape, the internal political cohesion of the Islamic Republic has begun to show severe, irreparable fractures. The supreme leadership in Tehran is now facing a profound dual crisis, a burning, undefendable frontier on the outside and a rapidly escalating, volatile wave of domestic unrest on the inside. The regular military forces, long sidelined and underfunded in favor of the ideologically pure IRGC, have reportedly expressed deep reluctance to commit their remaining conventional assets to what they perceive as a catastrophic, poorly planned conflict triggered by the Guard's aggressive regional meddling. This institutional rift has paralyzed the nation's decision-making process, leaving field commanders without clear strategic directives as the fires along the borders edge closer to the domestic heartlands. The day the Riyadh-Islamabad alliance blanketed Iran's borders in flames will go down in history as the moment the geopolitical balance of power in Southwest Asia was decisively and permanently reset. It exposed the fundamental fragility of a regime that chose to build its national security model on external subversion and asymmetric intimidation while leaving its own domestic frontiers, economy, and social cohesion completely exposed to a coordinated, high-intensity response. As the night falls over a burning, besieged nation, the glow of the fires along the horizon serves as a stark, terrifying monument to the complete collapse of a regional superpower, a regime that wanted to set the Middle East ablaze, only to find itself utterly consumed by an unquenchable, terrifying ring of fire engineered by an alliance it underestimated until it was tragically, catastrophically too late.